You are listening to She Rebel Radio. I'm Lulu Minns.
And I'm Mary Lobo.
Today we are talking about negativity to positivity, and you can download Lulu's free toolkit that goes along with this series.
Now, we've all heard that thinking positively can change our lives, but as an ex-lawyer, I was a bigger skeptic than most, but the science fascinated me. So for part one, we're going to look at negative thought patterns, negative news, and negative people. So brace yourself, and our listeners may want to notice and watch out for how you're feeling when we're talking about this negative stuff. But my promise is that we're going to dive into the positive stuff for part two of this episode, and maybe notice any tension, gripping, or holding that you feel in your body as we dive into the negative. Mary, how are you feeling about us diving into some negativity?
Well, true crime is my favorite topic. So I actually spend quite a lot of time reading negative stuff. I don't like negative people, but I do read an awful lot of negative stories.
Yeah. And you've got me back into that a little bit.
I've got you hooked, yes.
Yeah. After 10 years of rehab of being in criminal defence and not being able to, and it actually has tied into that is me not even reading the news very often unless something happens. But I have noticed a shift with that. But how about negative thoughts? Have you had any negative thoughts so far today? Or what is a negative thought pattern that you have identified previously, perhaps, that's kept you stuck, do you think?
I know that, yeah, I mean, in the past, I've definitely got myself into some spiraling of negative thought patterns when I've been struggling, particularly with my mental health. But at the moment, I I'm n- I'm in a good place, so I don't tend to actually spend any time feeding negative thoughts. So if something does pop into my head, I kind of dismiss it, push it away. And that is my natural, I would say that's my natural personality. But in the past, I have suffered with mental health, and then I have got into those negative spirals, and I've been really aware that I haven't actually been able to get out of them. So
And
I
can
have
we
had that
touch on that?
experience.
Can we touch on that word a minute of spiral? Because I speak to clients about this is a spiral. You're kind of spiraling downwards, right? Not upwards. And this is something important that we're talking about today, is that a negative thought attracts another negative thought, and then it's down, down, down instead of up, up,
Yeah.
up, as it were.
Yes. And it gives itself momentum. I think I always think of, like, the tornado, the spiraling. One negative thought feeds the next and the next and the next, and it starts gaining momentum. And then you then start experiencing things like fear, panic, anxiety, and all the sensations that go along with it. So once you get into that spiraling thought process, which I don't at the moment, that's not where I am at the moment, but I'm well aware that that could happen again, but I try and mitigate that now.
Yeah, and I think it's important, some of the language you use there of the tornado, it's like energy. It's giving it energy, and
Yeah.
wherever our attention goes, energy goes. And one of my kind of negative thought patterns or beliefs that I've pulled out over the years, which still trips me up, but I have a reframe for it, is it's too good to be true. So when things start going well, it's a real narrative that plays in my mind, that my reframe of that is everything good is true for me. Everything good is true for me. So when I trip on, oh, this is too good to be true, everything's going well, I replace it with that. And I help clients frequently find those replacement sentences for the old ones that, it's like an outdated computer system of compared to where it is that you're trying to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say that I would do the same, that when I start to think about the negative outcome of a situation, I always think, instead of thinking, but what if it, doesn't work out? I always go for what if it does work out? How amazing will it be if this works out? So I always try and reframe it. But I'm not trying to talk about here about toxic positivity, because there's also a lot of that where someone is experiencing something negative and someone says, oh, you just need to reframe it, or you just need to look at it like this. Like you can just click your fingers and suddenly a really shitty situation can be okay. And that is not the case. And I think you need to also accept that sometimes situations are just plain bad and you don't want to be in them.
Yeah.
But for the day to day, it's just not always going to the worst possible outcome.
Yeah. And that's a reframe of what's the worst that could happen to what's the best that could happen. And in
Yeah.
terms of that toxic positivity, I call it kind of papering over the cracks without or ignoring the fact of us addressing the emotions that are underneath our negative reaction, perhaps. And we were talking only last week about from reactivity to creativity. So, but we have to address the underlying patterns, particularly if things are repeating in our lives as well. So I wanted to share briefly with the listeners a little bit about the science. I'm not a scientist, but negative thinking, and as we've identified between us here, and negative thought patterns, because they do occur in patterns, keep us trapped within the problems, and we actually spotlight them and the problems become bigger. And the reason for that is because we go into fight, flight or freeze mode. With when we are having persistent negative thoughts, that we begin to release cortisol in the body, and that actually shuts down the synaptic connections within our brain. So we go into fight, flight or freeze, and we've all felt that. Does that kind of resonate with you, Mary, sometimes when we talked about those spirals?
Yes, definitely. When I have really been struggling, I've really noticed how I tend to be repeating the same thing over and over to myself. And even when people are presenting to me other outcomes or saying to me, but this could happen, or this could happen, or you don't know yet, maybe you need to investigate this. I've got this really fixed thinking. And it's that fixed thinking where you're locked in.
Yeah.
That is what's causing that situation, the fight, flight, freeze, where you are just locked in to a thought pattern, and it doesn't matter what anyone else says, or even sometimes it doesn't even matter if the circumstances change, you still remain in that sort of fear response. Yeah, and I've been there, and it's awful. And until there's a significant shift, sometimes you can't get yourself out of it.
Yeah, and we all know those people, and I don't mean this in a negative way, although we're talking about negativity here. Uh, Again, your language, I feel like, is really powerful around this, Mary, in terms of that being locked in or fixed thinking. And many, this is advanced personal development for advanced women. This podcast may be familiar with, fixed mindset versus growth mindset. And we've all perhaps, spent time with those people, sometimes loved ones, friends, family, who have that locked in fixed thinking, and can help us to spiral our own negativity or pull us into a negative place when we ourselves are not there at that moment in time. And often that can be because they love us and they want to protect us and all of that stuff. But I love the saying, we become the average of the 5 people that we hang out with the most. So how do you deal with the negative people in your life?
Well, I think, as you've sort of said, that with relationships with other people, you tend to other people, what you're dealing with a lot of people, unless it's someone who you're not overly familiar with, you can kind of predict how they're going to respond to things. So if I know that someone is invariably going to respond negatively to something, I just wouldn't tell them, I would just, avoid giving someone, if I have some information about a project I'm going to do, and I know that they would automatically go towards the fear response, I just wouldn't tell them about it.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And not telling people again about particularly new ideas, because they're fragile and they're little seeds in their spring, that the last thing you need is a negative and fear-based response. And we are going to talk about fear in a much later episode, so we're going to get even darker and in the shadow with this stuff that we do have to address. And I'm also one to actually not spend time with those people. I know when I kind of have dived into more positive thinking, gratitude, we're going to talk about in a moment, people actually just kind of fell away from my life because we were almost in a different place, on a different vibration, a different energy, and like attracts like. So sometimes the more you kind of turn up the positivity and the vibration, those people start to fall away. And I've noticed that with clients a lot when we, doing some of this work and they're in change and transition and, moving more to not toxic positivity, dealing with the underlying emotions and reaching a more natural place of positivity, that again, those negative people can gradually kind of fall away or create distance between them without even trying.
Which is great if they are people that you can allow to fall away. But obviously, if it's a partner or a family member, they're not someone that's going to necessarily fall away. In some cases, with family members, you need them to fall away. But with your day-to-day, the quotidian living, you may have a partner who just doesn't support your ideas, doesn't support your business. You may have a best friend who, for whatever reason, doesn't think your next move is the right move and thinks that you're being too hasty or risky. And we still need to be able to sit in our decisions, regardless of the people being incredibly close to us who might go against us. So in those cases, it's also about protecting yourself, isn't it? And maybe just investing in the relationships where people are supportive of what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think it's that being careful what you tell them, even if they are really close. But also, I think you called me kick ass the other day. I'm like, sometimes you've got to kick the ass with that shit and be like, is that my best friend, or is that my partner for who I need to be within the next 5 or 10 years? And I'm not saying that's an easy process, but that is one sometimes people need to face as well. But let's talk about negative news and disasters and crime, if you want. As you said,
Yeah.
you're a big fan, and I
My
know
favorite topic.
Yeah, and as I said, I'm being sucked back in. But I was really fascinated when I originally wrote the ebook that goes with the series and the toolkit that you can download as a freebie that goes with the series, actually how the world is obsessed with news and disaster and, true crime stuff. And we can read the news first thing in the morning and be exposed to horrific images on a regular basis. And people and places actually become more popular after a disaster. I was living in Shoreham when we had the air crash at an air show, and actually house prices went up. So
How
it's
peculiar.
interesting. I know, it's so peculiar, but the same with, we're going to talk about some of the things that, have captured our interest recently. But one of the things that's happened recently, the death of Liam Payne, which I think is incredibly sad. Again, now, his music's back in the charts and things like that kind of stuff happens. But when I wrote, the toolkit and things like that in 2017, we've actually seen an increase of this stuff. We've got Ukraine, Gaza, politicians, we've got celebrities and the rich, people trafficking and children trafficking. And, we've had COVID and all of that stuff. So what is your relationship with the news as an ex-journalist, and what negative news stories have you been addicted to recently?
Well, I love the news. Definitely. I'm a news junkie. I listen, I'm on 24-hour news. I like to keep informed. I look at it from a humanistic point of view. I find human stories fascinating. I enjoy learning about people, and a lot of I think that's why I'm really into the true crime. It's not because I'm obsessed with murder and death or anything like that, but I'm always interested in the stories behind a crime, the human story. As to whether, and I don't always necessarily look at it negatively. I don't come away feeling depressed or anything like that. I've got more of a fascination with it. And in terms of current news story, I've been very interested in the Liam Payne story, just because, as always, it's a situation where it didn't need to play out like that. And it's about, I guess there's loads of armchair detectives, like, how did this happen? How did this happen? This guy who was sort of on the straight and narrow, he was, sober, he was trying to get his visa in America, and he had to get tested to be allowed the visa. His visa was about to be issued, and he'd been tested and come back clear and sober. And then within a case of 48 hours, he has descended into drug addiction and is sadly has lost his life. There is a story there. There's a fascination from people, because like, how can, it's like those sliding doors moments. How has this happened? How has that, in a second, life can change. And I think that is quite often the fascination with people, because that could happen to any of us. None of
Yeah.
us are immune to that. It might not necessarily be drugs, but none of us are immune to the fact that in a second our lives can change. We don't know how or when that's going to happen. And I think a lot of people, they find that there's an intrigue there. And I think with the Liam Payne story, it's just so sad, because he's such a young man and he had these demons, and sadly the fame and celebrity was a bit of a curse for him.
Yeah, and I think I definitely, Liam's stories really captured my interest over this last week. And we've kind of seen him. I'm not a One Direction fan, I have to say, sorry to people that are, but I grew up with a lot of music, and I am always interested in, I just find really successful people really fascinating as well. And I feel like we're all, we've seen him growing up on TV and kind of grieving this collective tragedy really of addiction, because it's not his story doesn't exist in a vacuum. We've seen it so many times before in terms of Amy Winehouse, and it keeps happening. And it's touched our lives in many ways. Before that, I have to say, I was obsessed with the story of P. Diddy and what the hell is going on there,
What
and
the hell is
how has
going
he,
on?
yeah, and again, as an ex-defense lawyer, I don't like to judge before trials take place and things like that. But I was listening to Red Handed podcast you got me into, true crime, about Biggie Smalls and Tupac, and how they lost their lives, and P. Diddy's name was mentioned a lot, and I was like, oh, he's probably got away with a lot of shit over the years, and it's now coming to bite him on the ass, and the amount of other celebrities that are potentially involved in that, and is just shocking and horrifying. But yeah, I was definitely interested in that one the week before.
I think it's also incredible that a lot of people who have fame, celebrity, power, money, they actually think they're going to get away with this stuff. Like, I mean, I think it's fantastic that we're uncovering so much in the last few years. We've uncovered so much. What's the word I'm looking for?
Shadow,
Yeah,
unconscious,
yeah.
horrible
There's so much
nastiness.
darkness. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's exactly it. We've uncovered so much, but it's incredible that it's taken this long. It's incredible that
Yeah.
a lot of people, similar with R. Kelly, we're talking decades of abuse that went unnoticed or unspoken. Like, obviously people in that entourage, they would have known. The people who were affected, the families, they all knew, but for whatever reason there was like a major blackout, so the rest of the world didn't necessarily know. People may have had their suspicions.
But yeah, the
But
powers that be are
decades.
closing ranks around them and
Yes.
allowing stuff to happen. And that
Yeah.
kind of horrifies me more than the person doing what they're doing, because as I've worked in criminal justice, I've been fascinated by that human behavior my entire life, apart from my 10-year detox of studying all the positive stuff instead. And yeah, it's so interesting that all of this is coming to the surface. And I think some of P. Diddy's story, who says what of what he's done, is this powerful men in particular thinking that women and young people do not have the same value or rights as them. So much so, their shadow is so much so that I believe they don't even feel like they've done anything wrong. And
Oh
that is
gosh, absolutely. Well, I
horrifying.
mean, in with P. Diddy, case in point, I think he's pleading not guilty to any of it when there's evidence. Do you know what I mean? He's almost claiming he didn't even have these parties, all these parties that he had that went on for days and days, these freak-offs. They weren't as bad as they've been made out. And it's like there is countless stories of people going to those parties and not being able to leave for days on end. And he's
Yeah.
almost rewriting history like it never happened. Incredible.
Yeah, and then can hide behind that I've got loads of money and people are trying to sue me for XYZ and they're going to make money out of it and, you know, all of that jazz. But yuck. Notice, listeners, how all of this yuckiness has made you feel, you know, if you're feeling tense and gripping in your body. But we're going to move on to positivity and the attitude of gratitude. And perhaps you might feel less tension or holding and a more expansive feeling. But just notice. So we're going to talk about positive thought patterns, which is when we become more solution focused, because the opposite happens. We create more synaptic connections in the brain and we are better placed to solve anything that crops up. So we spiral upwards and not downwards. And daily gratitude is a great place to start to rewire our brains to more positivity, because as humans, you know, our brain is more wired to the negative because we're looking out for danger and things like that. So Mary, how do you practice your gratitude?
I think that it's not something, I don't write a list. I don't, I wouldn't say it's something that's necessarily conscious, but it's definitely something that is unconscious every single day. I do meditate. I do have periods of reflection. And when I do that, I focus on feelings of peace, equanimity, nature. I love nature. I love going on walks, and I always look around and I think how beautiful this is. I have a daughter. I look at her, I think how beautiful my daughter is. And I look at the things that I have around me and I think, aren't I lucky that I have got choices? Aren't I lucky that I can pay for this, for example? Aren't I lucky that I can eat, that I don't have to struggle to put food on the table? They're just thoughts that go through my head every day rather than me making some conscious sort of gratitude list or consciously thinking, I need to be grateful for all this.
Yeah, I like the sentence, aren't I lucky? And I certainly, when I go through phases of writing gratitude lists, and it was really essential when I left my job, you know, as a lawyer almost 10 years ago. And actually the negativity of what I was dealing with daily had seeped in. So I found it really useful. But what I did find, because a lot of people say, you know, writing gratitude list in the morning, I find the evenings really, really powerful. And what I've noticed is that spotlighting if one bad thing had happened. No, and I had a lot of financial difficulties when I first left legal practice. So I noticed I was filling up my car with petrol and being like, oh my God, you know, it's just like the last 50 quid or whatever, instead of going, oh, I'm really lucky I've got the money to fill up my car with petrol. So I do it periodically, or, you know, if there is a situation in life that's happening that I feel like I just need that rewiring and refocus. But my advice to the listeners is to if you want to start a gratitude list or go back to it, really try it in the evenings, because you can then reflect on the day and see everything that you were grateful for that you might have missed as the day has gone by. So talking about positive news and blessings, not always something the mainstream concerns itself with. So when creating this episode, I actually signed up for positivenews.com. So I get an email every week which shares socially relevant and uplifting stories. And there's a few more. These are more like international ones called Good News Network, Good, The Optimist Daily, HuffPost Good News, and Reasons to be Cheerful. But I also did a little bit of research for the UK. There's the Happy News by Emily Coxted, and the BBC have got an inspiring stories page as well. So I read about worms eating plastic and a new treatment for cervical cancer. I'm going to share my positive story in a minute, but Mary, have you got a positive story that you found?
Yes, well, this is just the story that brings me joy as a writer, that there's the Poetry Pharmacy in London. I don't know if anyone's heard of that. It opened, I think it officially opened in the summer. So it's starting to be established now. It's in Oxford Street, and instead of dispensing drugs, pills, you can go and get some poetry. I think they have little vials where they have little, you know, some aphorisms, positive words. You can also, it's a bookshop, so you can go and read at your leisure. There's a cafe there. I just really like this idea. It's called the Poetry Pharmacy. And as someone who's a writer and who loves words and language, it just fills me with joy, and I can't wait to go. And Lulu, we should go together.
Oh, yeah. No, that sounds amazing. And I love that you use the word joy, because that is the highest level emotion on our spiral upwards. So that's another good tip. If you're just focusing on what brings you joy, as you said also earlier, like looking at your little girl, brings you joy, it's then, the attitude of gratitude, the appreciation, attracts more that we appreciate. So yeah, that sounds super cool, and like a London date for
Yes.
podcast co-hosts. I love it. I feel like mine now, it starts off as a bit of a negative, right? But I love, again, I've, work in transformation and change. And it's an international story. So I love that yours was a very UK local based thing that we can access. And mine was on Good News Network. And it was about a South African man called Angus, who was diving off the French Polynesian island, and he is a diver, and he was attacked by a 7-foot shark. But the headline, I know, which is, and I can be a bit scared of the water anyway, so that's just fed that. But he survived. He's doing really well, and when he went into the hospital, the doctors found the shark's tooth in his arm, and he now wears it as an earring and a souvenir, which just made me chuckle, and said he's got a story for life and a conversation starter. And what was really lovely about the story as well is he said, and I'm a big lover of animals, as are you, Mary. And, I've got friends down in Cornwall, and Lizzie, who's been on this podcast, who's, a marine mammal medic and all of that. He said, we can't blame the animals for this. This was probably a territory thing, because wherever he was diving, was, he's a professional, etc., was, somewhere that was probably more risky. And that shark was just trying to protect its territory. And I think that's a really important article in terms of us having a greater understanding of those that we share the planet with, because it's only 200 years ago, I think, there was a whale that came into the Thames or something, and people in London were trying to kill it. Like, that's how much we've evolved over this period. And I think in lots of the Good News story, there was lots of eco stuff of how we are understanding animals more, or looking after the planet in a better way, instead of this, we're all doomed and that's the end of it. So it just made me chuckle, and I love a bit of jewelry as well. So
was he maimed then? Obviously not.
No, but I think he's got some degree of rehabilitation and nervous system, stuff. And he said he's not going to stop diving as well. So showing that doing what you love, he's going to continue to do it and take the risks that come with that.
Yeah, I absolutely love animals, and that's another source of, my daily gratitude that we were talking about, of just joy. It's watching animals. I've got a cat. You've got 2 cats. We often send each other pictures of our cats.
We do. Cat
Because
club.
they are such characters. I've got a really gorgeous, handsome dog as well, who's a pain in the backside. But just such a character. There's so much fun. And I think that sometimes, we just need to, we're so in our heads, we've got all this stuff going on, like, I've got to go here, I've got to go there, I've got to pay this, got to be that person, to all these different people. But when you just sit down for a minute and your cat comes on your lap, or your dog comes to greet you, and you just spend that moment just absorbed with them in the present moment, that in itself is just so healing and so joyful. It's just about remaining present. I think that is a big takeaway about how to have gratitude, because when you're not thinking about past, present, future, sorry, you're not past, future, where you need to be, who you need to be, you can actually look around you and see just how great life is.
Yeah, you can really find that joy. And I feel like cats, like, I do love dogs too, but I'm a total cat person, as you know. They are so present, as you say, they're just like, let's just hang out and not worry about stuff. They're meditating all the time, and they sit and purr. And yeah, they really do encourage you to come in that space. And I think there's studies that show as well, even, and I was talking to someone about this the other day, in terms of, the lack of physical affection and cuddling, in lockdown and things like that, that even if you cuddle your pet once a day, your happiness scale and joy increases. So we can add them to our positive people list, our little familiars and animals.
Their furry faces.
Yeah, 100%.
Everyone needs to look at a furry face today. That's what you need to do. Go and find a furry face.
So if there's lots of men with beards around, if people start staring at you, they've been listening to She Rebel Radio. So I might be included. I'm a fan of a beard. So science shows that the positive people improve our resilience and help us bounce back from challenges. You know, you're one of those positive people in my life, and I hope vice versa. You're not like,
Yes, likewise.
How do you surround yourself with positive people?
I wouldn't say that I would go around being like, you're positive, you're negative. That's
Like me, you mean? No, I don't do that.
I'll have you, thanks, and nah, pass. But I think it's to do with what we're attracted to. Like you said, like begets like. I would say I'm a pretty upbeat person, except for when I haven't been upbeat. I don't want to, get into a false sense of security that I'm this like really happy person all the time. Because as you know, you have been present when I've gone through the darkest period of my life, and that can happen to anyone at any given time. But my baseline is positive. My baseline is to be someone who is joyful, and I want to make other people feel good. So I think by nature, those are the people that are attracted to me. So I have most of the people in my life are positive, I would say.
Yeah.
There are some people, not by choice, that probably are more negative than me. But as I said, I've got ways of dealing with them, just batting it off and not telling them things.
Yeah, and that's, includes the effortlessness. If you focus on your own positivity and your own vibration, then those people just surround you. And my answer, I think, ties in a little bit to last week when we were talking about reactivity to creativity. I love surrounding myself with creative people as well. And again, not saying that they're all entrepreneurial people out there doing stuff, because I'm not saying that all of those people are positive, but you have to have a certain degree of positivity to put the effort in to create something and, put it out there and all of that stuff. So I find that a really inspiring and positive environment to be in and to talk with people to talk to.
Well, you have to have faith, don't you? And I think when you're an entrepreneur, so much of what you do is based on faith. And faith is by its nature positive, because there's a positive outcome. This is why people who are spiritual and religious can get through a lot of adversity.
Now, before our listeners go, remember you can download the free toolkit that goes along with this series. And as always, we're going to share with you the 2 journaling tools for this week. Mary.
So this week, I will be the woman who lets go of negativity. And I'm going to do this by, as a caveat, I am in the process of selling a property, buying another property, and it's been hell on earth. But I'm going to let go of any negative feelings I have towards solicitors and estate agents. And I am going to believe that everything is going to work out, and I am going to exchange contracts by the end of the month.
Yes. Going to that. What's the best that can happen? And we apologise to any solicitors and estate agents for
Can you please pull out your finger and do your job properly?
And me being an ex-solicitor, I'm the worst possible client for solicitors. Anyway, now this week, I will be the woman who chooses positivity. I will do this by deleting my Facebook app on my phone, because I really don't use it for anything apart from my membership group for my clients. And I'm finding that I am doom scrolling. I got a little bit interested in P. Diddy. So like the algorithms are telling me all this weird stuff, and they're like AI images. And now it's happening with Liam Payne. And I need to delete it, at least for this week. I don't use it for anything particularly. So I'm taking it off. That is me. Mary, I've loved co-hosting with you as always. And a big thank you to our listeners.
Thanks, Lulu.
You've been listening to She Rebel Radio with me, Lulu Minns.
And me, Mary Lobo. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you left us a review.
And perhaps you could share this episode with another amazing woman.